$29 billion. That is the total price tag for U.S. operations in Iran, according to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's recent testimony before Congress. However, a far more chilling figure is emerging from the private sector. A new impact report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies reveals a critical degradation of U.S. strategic reserves. According to the data, the United States has burned through approximately 50% of its total inventory of THAAD and Patriot PAC-3 interceptors. Furthermore, the stockpile of PRSM, precision strike missiles, the backbone of long-range offensive capability, has been depleted by 45%. While Secretary Hegseth maintains that readiness concerns are being overblown, the strategic math suggests otherwise. The primary issue isn't just the volume of fire, it's the intended theater. These three specific weapon systems are the exact assets the Pentagon has spent years stockpiling for a very different engagement: the defense of Taiwan. May 12 hearing update. During the May 12 congressional testimony, Secretary Hegseth and Pentagon Comptroller Jules Hurst, despite the ceasefire taking effect in early April, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, maintained that China remains the pacing challenge. That statement is the linchpin of the crisis. The munitions the U.S. just expended in the Middle East are the exact assets engineered to deter Beijing. The Patriot PAC-3 is a mid-range interceptor produced by Lockheed Martin with a unit cost of approximately $4 million. It is the primary shield for airfields, naval ports, and forward operating bases against ballistic and cruise missile threats. When Iran launched Fatah and Khaibar Shekin missiles at Israel and U.S. Gulf assets, the Patriot and THAAD systems served as the primary line of kinetic interception. Standard engagement doctrine dictates a two-shot salvo per target to ensure a kill. Against Iranian swarms using decoys, that ratio can climb to 3 interceptors per threat. This is the asymmetric economics of war. Iran fires a $200,000 missile. The U.S. counters with $12 million in hardware. The bottleneck? Lockheed Martin only produces about 550 PAC-3 units annually. At the height of the Iran conflict, defending Israel and U.S. bases burned through hundreds of rounds per week. It is a structural mismatch that funding alone cannot fix in the short term. THAAD is a terminal high-altitude defense system, costing $12 million per interceptor, designed to neutralize ballistic threats in the exoatmosphere. The U.S. maintains only 7 THAAD batteries globally. 2 are permanently stationed in South Korea and Guam, specifically to counter North Korea and China. With half the global THAAD stockpile expended against Iranian salvos, Pacific commanders are facing a critical restock dilemma. Even more vital is the PRSM. This is the Army's newest long-range asset, with an initial 500 kilometers range, future variants exceeding 1,000 kilometers. The PRSM was built for a singular mission, firing from the first island chain, the Philippines and Japan, to sink Chinese warships in a Taiwan Strait or South China Sea contingency. Burning through 45% of the PRSM inventory in the Middle East means the U.S. is subsidizing one theater at the direct expense of the Pacific. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf have depleted massive quantities of SM-3 and SM-6 missiles. The SM-3 intercepts ballistic targets in space at $12 million to $28 million per shot, while the multi-mission SM-6 costs roughly $4 million. A single Arleigh Burke has only 96 vertical launch system cells. Once the magazines are dry, the ship must rotate out of the combat zone to a secure port for a cold rearm. During Iranian saturation strikes, some U.S. vessels reportedly exhausted nearly their entire air defense loadout in a single night. This is a structural vulnerability for the Navy. The same hulls and the same magazines intended for the Western Pacific are being emptied elsewhere. To be objective, the F-35, B-2, and Tomahawk platforms demonstrated absolute air supremacy in the opening phases. Iranian air defenses were effectively neutralized. However, kinetic dominance cannot compensate for industrial base fragility. It takes 2 years to manufacture a single Patriot interceptor. SM-3 production lines are operating at capacity. The PRSM is only just entering full-rate production, with 2,026 yields projected in the low hundreds. Meanwhile, China is churning out DF-21 and DF-26 carrier killers by the thousands every year. The lesson of artillery in Ukraine is now being repeated with air defense. The side that outproduces the other wins the war of attrition. Every Patriot burned in the Persian Gulf is one less for Taipei. Every THAAD interceptor fired over Israel is one less guarding Guam. Every PRSM expended in Iran is a shot that won't be fired at a Chinese hull. Beijing is watching closely. They don't need to win a direct kinetic exchange with the United States. They only need to wait while the US hollows out its own magazine in secondary theaters. This is the logic of strategic patience that China has refined for over a decade. When Secretary Hegseth asserts that ammunition concerns are overblown, he isn't technically incorrect. The United States maintains sufficient lethality to close out operations in Iran. However, the most critical takeaway from the CSIS impact report lies in its long-term forecast. The primary risk is not this current engagement. The risk lies in the next conflict, and that vulnerability will persist for years. $29 billion is merely the price tag. The true strategic cost is measured in every Patriot, every THAAD, and every PRSM that has left the magazine. These assets will take years to replace. In that recovery window, the U.S. deterrent posture in the Pacific is demonstrably weaker than it was yesterday. That is the reality the American public and the Pentagon must confront.